Hello, welcome to Life's Dirty Little Secrets. I'm Chris McCurry.
And I'm Emma Waddington. And today we're thrilled to welcome two guests whose work has profoundly shaped the way we think about parenting, resilience, and what kids truly need to thrive. Dr. William Stixrud is a clinical neuropsychologist, founder of the Stixrud Group in Washington, D.C., and a best selling author whose work blends science, empathy, and deep wisdom. He's best known for his three books. The first one in 2018, The Self-Driven Child. Then they published What Do You Say? And now the third book is The 7 Principles of a Self-Driven Child, all of which offer powerful guidance on how we as parents can foster autonomy, motivation, and connection in young people's lives.
And we also want to welcome Ned Johnson. He is an author, speaker, coach, professional tutor geek, and the founder of Prep Matters, an educational company providing academic tutoring, educational planning, and standardized test prep. And Ned has written for the New York Times, The Telegraph, U.S. News and World Report, and the Washington Post. And he is also the co-author of the books that Emma just mentioned, The Self-Driven Child, the 7 Principles for Raising a Self-Driven Child, and the book on What Do You Say? Talking with Kids to Build Motivation, Stress Tolerance, and Happy Home, in addition to a book, Conquering the SAT, How Parents Can Help Teens Overcome the Pressure and Succeed. So welcome, gentlemen. So I have a New Yorker cartoon of living room setting, parents in the living room, dad's on the chair, mother's on the couch, kids are on the floor, like destroying their toys. And the father is looking at the mother and saying, "Me, I thought you were raising them." Um, so is we interviewed Emily Edlin a while back, who wrote a marvelous book, The Autonomy, Supportive Parenting, and we have The Self-Driven Child. What is this interest in autonomy supporting and the self-driven aspect? Is it just parents just don't want to deal with parenting anymore, or is there something more important going on here? It's sort of obviously a loaded question, but what is your sense of what's driving this clear desire to support parents in seeing that their kids do well without burning themselves out by trying to over control their kids' lives?
Ned and I got to autonomy through our research on a sense of control and the research on stress and stress in the brain. And we learned that the most stressful thing you'd experience is a low sense of control, a low sense of time. I'm stuck, I'm helpless, I'm hopeless, I'm passive, nothing I can do about it. We also knew that mental health problems are rooted in a low sense of control, and because they're all stress-related problems. And also, every place we look to try to understand how do kids develop that self-driven, self-motivated, intrinsically driven kind of style of motivation, every angle, every arrow pointed in the direction of autonomy. And I think that it's crucial. It's just a basic human drive. It's a basic biological need and psychological need. And it's just, I think there's just so much evidence now. It's so clear scientifically that autonomy supporting parenting is way better than controlling parenting in terms of raising kids who are happy, healthy, respectful, kind, like that.
Emotionally resilient. I mean, across the board. Yeah.
So how does this differ from just laissez-faire parenting?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, the literature on parenting styles, I mean, the 6 years of research shows that there are kind of 3 dominant styles, right? There's authoritarian, my way or the highway, this is my house, my rules, I'll tell you what to do, which is terrible for childhood development, right? Healthy development. The only thing that's worse than that, of course, is laissez-faire. You can do what you want, I don't really care, because it makes kids feel so deeply unsafe, as though the people who should care about the most really don't care, and you can kind of do whatever you want. And the sweet spot is in between of authoritative parenting, where we as parents have natural authority because we're older, we're taller, we have credit cards, all those things, but where we naturally exert our authority through wisdom and lived experience, but we're not doing it in a way that is overly controlling. And we'll get into this, I'm sure, but when so often some of the people who will read our work think, well, you're just saying let kids do whatever they want. We're not talking about that at all. We're not saying you let a 4-year-old run the household, because that's not good for everyone, especially the 4-year-old, because it's overwhelming. We don't want to give kids choices that they can't handle. It's just that we don't want to deprive kids of choices, particularly about their own lives, that they can handle with our support, not perfectly because they're adults in training, they're grown-ups in making. But the approach that we take of being a parenting, what we talk about is parent as a consultant, where we offer help, we offer advice, we prescribe limits, but we give kids a huge amount of autonomy within bounds, right? So this is not at all laissez-faire. It's really, rather than stepping away from kids, we're just stepping back and we're walking side by side with them, rather than pushing them from behind or leaving them to their own devices.
And I'll just add that we gave a lecture a couple months ago to a bunch of educators on why the brain craves autonomy. And the idea is that when they're 4 months old, you see babies crawling, exploring. Nobody's telling them to do it. They do it on their own. And if you thwart that drive to explore, to master the world themselves, it really interferes with development. And arguably, the two most important aspects, the features of adolescent development, are, number one, that ability to connect with people outside the family, and that intrinsic drive for autonomy and independence. And even in with elderly people like me, people in a nursing home, you give them a choice about one thing: what time they have dinner. They live longer. It's just this basic human drive, and we thwart it at our peril.
So let's talk a little bit about intrinsic motivation. I mean, having worked for decades in child psychology, particularly working with adolescents, I've had so many adolescents, shrug and say, I don't do my homework because I'm not motivated. And I sometimes talk about the motivation fairy. They're waiting for the motivation fairy to come in the middle of the night and go, ding, now you have motivation, which horrifies them. And they'd probably swat it with a fly swatter if that's their excuse for not doing their homework. It's like, I don't have motivation, as if it's a thing.
Yes.
So, what is your advice to parents? Because this would always leave me just going, I don't know what to do with this. But, what is your advice to parents around this idea of motivation and, whether it's a thing, it's certainly not something that you can go and buy at the store. But this idea of intrinsic motivation, what do you do when there doesn't appear to be any?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said about motivation, and what I'm going to push back a little bit, because what I hear, and you're of course voicing the feelings about parents. What I hear about that is, my kid is not intrinsically motivated to do the thing that I want him to do. He's not intrinsically motivated to do his schoolwork or to care about his homework or to care about grades, and that may be true. 100% may be true.
It's true for me.
What? Yeah, but Bill told us a delightful story. And the thing that we want to keep in mind is what really matters most. The homework, the motivation to do homework, the fact that kids get all A's, the fact that they do particularly well in school, or that they develop, one, a sense that they're going to get out of life what they put into it, and two, that this is their life, right? Who's responsible for what? And there are many people who couldn't have given a fig about the schoolwork who went on to develop healthy and lead successful lives. And we'll come back to Bill Fabulous Dr. William R. Stixrud in just a moment. And so our take on this is that and I asked, so I'm a test prep geek. I help kids prepare for standardized admissions tests at U.S. universities. And I ask kids this all the time. What's the most important outcome of high school and adolescence? And they'll look at me as well, obviously getting good grades and getting to a good college. And I say, and they say, what? And I said, respectfully, it's developing the brain that you're going to carry into university if you go, and the brain that you're going to carry into adulthood, because adolescents are developing the brain that they're going to carry. This is it. I mean, apart from prenatal through age 2, this is it. And so we want kids to be intrinsically motivated. And if that's for school, fantastic. But it might be for music. It might be for art. It might be for wooing the pretty girl. It might be for, for small engine repair, for their after school job, for social justice, for environmental justice. It could be for anything. And as long, and a borrow line from Bill, as long as a kid is working harder and harder to get better at something that matters to them, we don't worry about them, because they're developing brains that can be high effort, high focus, the whole flow state, high determination, overcome obstacles, develop resilience. And parents somehow think, and teachers as well think, that the only way the kids develop that is through dutifully doing their homework. And the research just doesn't support that at all. Now, the reality is, in terms of schoolwork, most kids don't want to go to school every day and have the teacher be like, all right, Johnson, what are you doing? They don't want to feel like, like they're dopes. Most kids don't want to struggle in school. And we can get into the kind of the where and the why of what intrinsic motivation actually looks like. But a lot of parents think, I need my kid to be intrinsically motivated for school. Most kids, one, they want to do well, but so many kids, what looks like intrinsic motivation is actually wildly extrinsic. They're driven by fear, meaning their parents don't have to say anything to get them to do their homework. The kids are already fearful that if I don't do well, I won't do, this, that, or the other. And it's a tricky place, because we're trying to get kids who don't engage with school to engage in a more healthy, authentic, and sustainable way. We also have kids who are obsessively driven, and they really don't care about anything apart from getting the A. And we're trying to down-regulate them a little bit so that they can care about school in ways that are authentic and sustainably driven. It's not easy to be, kid right now. It's also not easy to be a parent of a kid going through school. But yeah, we don't care as much about homework as a lot of the rest of the world cares about homework.
Oh, I certainly agree. I'm always telling parents, you can't sacrifice your relationship with your child on the altar of homework.
Really well put. Do we want to jump in and talk about I love you too much, or?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I just, as a neuropsychologist who tests kids for a living, I see a lot of unmotivated, underachieving kids. And as Ned implied, if there's something that they, besides video games, if there's something they work hard to get better and better at, I tell them, I'm not worried about you, because I know that you're sculpting a brain that knows how to be really focused, how to combine high focus, high energy, high determination, high effort, and low stress. And it's a beautiful brain state. And my sense is, as you get older, school is going to become more important to you. But I'm confident that when that happens, you're going to have a brain that can go pedal to the metal. I'm confident about this because I graduated from high school with a 2.8 grade point average in Bellevue, Washington, where you are, Chris, or close to where you are. And that was rounding up. And I was a passionate rock and roll guy. I lived for my rock and roll band, and I did a little homework. And I go into this room where I had an organ and at that time a record player, and I'd say, well, I'd tell myself, I'll spend an hour on music, and then I'll do homework. And I'd come out of that music room 3 hours later, having no idea what time it was, and just going to bed. And I realized I graduated from, my father died at the very end of my senior year in high school. And I started college 2 months later as a straight A student. And I didn't get smarter over those 2 months. I carried a brain. School became more important to me. I took it more seriously. It kind of woke me up. And I could go pedal to the metal in academics, even though I wasn't motivated, particularly in high school.
Because your brain had been honed with your interest. By the way, I had a 2.7.
For one.
I'm thinking you had at least a 2.9. I'm just going to throw that out there. So
I just wanted to add, actually, one of the favorite, your first book, The Self-Driven Child, really shaped the way I parent. And it was like a coming home. I remember when it was released, and I remember your interview with Diana Hill and your second and your third interview with her. And I particularly loved the chapter where you say, I love you too much to fight over homework or something to that effect. It was music to my ears because, I used to work with a lot of children. Now I work with mostly adults and couples, but I used to hate seeing that battle. And you're absolutely right. It's very, very difficult to try and motivate, I have air quotes, your kid to do work. It just doesn't what happens is you sacrifice your relationship, and that's your sort of principle number 1 in your third book, put connection first. What I just wanted to sort of validate, because we've had a couple of conversations on our podcast about overachievement, striving, and we seem to be living in a time where everything is under the microscope of, performance. And performance as parents is measured by how well our kids are doing academically in their sports. It's like nothing can just be savored and enjoyed. Everything needs to be, excellence, this pursuit of excellence. So as parents, I noticed this incredible anxiety about kids needing to do well that I think is trickling down to kids feeling like they need to do well. And they seem to choose one of two routes, either go down this sort of perfectionist overachievement route because they, feel the pressure, or check out. And obviously that's grossly oversimplified. There's lots of people in between, but the parents, we get sort of drawn into this fear that if we don't help our kids succeed, we are failing as parents. And I don't know how we got here because that wasn't the way I was parented.
And I would say they often it's not so much if we don't help our kids, if we don't make them succeed. Right.
Yes, you're
I mean,
right.
our perspective on
Yes.
this is my obligation as a parent is not to make sure my child is successful, and make sure he gets good grades, or make sure she engaged in school. My obligation as a parent is to offer support if they want to succeed.
Yes.
How can I help? Right. And to your point about
Yes.
this chapter of I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. I'm not going to act like it's my responsibility for you to do
Yes.
anything. But if this matters to you, I'll help you in any way I can, right? I'll
Yes.
take your homework. I'll sit with you, da 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 da. And this is, our friend Tina Payne Bryson talked, it's
Mhm.
adversity challenge plus support where we develop resilience. And this is our obligation as parents, as educators, as adults to support young people, but not in that authoritarian way that says you
Mm.
must. Because then,
Yeah.
then everyone is stressed and everyone feels a low sense of control because the kid's being told what to do, and we're trying to make them do something that they can just go nah and close their eyes and lie on the floor, right? It's like this is a really
Yeah.
disempowering place for everybody.
It is. But what I'm also hearing, and as you're saying, we want to be there to nurture that brain that's developing into that adult brain. That's really beautifully said. What happens, and you say in the book, in your fabulous last book, this idea that we want to sort of be a witness of any passion, any motivation that they do show. It doesn't have to be academics. But what if they don't? Because the video gaming is a problem. What if that is their passion? What if we have a kid that is spending hours every day in front of the screen with their friends, but mostly gaming, and is sort of switched off, not engaged in sports, not engaged in a lot outside of the gaming? What do we do then? Because I know that is a concern.
Well, we talk about we talk about technology, particularly in our first 2 books. And our
Mm.
angle is that our goal is ultimately for kids to be able to manage their technology independently.
Yeah.
And one of the principles of motivation that we subscribe to is you can't make somebody want what they don't want, and you can't make
Mm.
them not want what they want. So
Yeah.
what we recommend regarding technology is show interest in it. Appreciate how
Mm.
cool it is when how cool it is to see a kid playing with his friends and having so much fun, and have conversations about it. This collaborative problem solving process where
Mm.
you start with empathy and you express it. How God, I'd love to learn myself. I'd love to play at some point and see if I can beat you, and you express appreciation for what they like to do.
Mm.
And also say, we also know that if people kids spend too much time on this, it really screws them up. I mean, it
Mm.
undermines their development. It's not good for their health. They don't have energy. Everything else seems boring. And so I
Mm.
couldn't live with myself if I felt I was letting you spend too much time.
Yeah.
And you kind of focus on what you can control and what you could, and certainly, I mean, I yeah, maybe 15 years ago, I saw a kid who was diagnosed with a feigned sleep disorder because he was getting up at 2 in the morning, playing video games all night, and pretending he couldn't sleep.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah, and we don't want to get into that kind of cat and mouse game with kids.
Mm.
But I think ultimately, when we pay for their minutes, we look for where we have some leverage, and I can't in good conscience, pay the electricity on that. I can't pay for the minutes if we don't work out some
Mm.
arrangement regarding technology that works for you. I want it to work for you, but I also want it to
Mhm.
work for me. And
Mhm.
our sense is when we start with appreciation and empathy and understanding,
Mm.
as opposed to just
Yeah.
judgment, because so much of what kids get is
Mm.
get off, get
Yeah.
off, get off, get off.
Yeah.
Ned, what would I?
Well, it's interesting. Well, we were just lecturing at a local school when our third book, the Seven Principles, came out. And we put to the students, the whole upper school, I don't know, 700 kids or something at this independent school, a question that we've asked this multiple times at, I don't know, a dozen different schools, and said, how many of you feel like you're on your cell phone too much? And this is separate from gaming, but kind of related. Said, how many of you feel like you're on your phone too much? And like 85% of kids raised their hands. Here's the great question. The follow-up is, how many of you feel like you're on your cell phone more than you want to be? The same
Mm.
per the same percent goes up. Kids know. I mean, look, if a kid plays for 7 hours straight on a video game, he
Yeah.
enjoyed it, but he comes off feeling a little queasy, and what
Yeah.
happened to my day, and I can't believe, and the challenge is a kid in that situation is ambivalent, right? He wants to play with his friends. He wants to beat the level. He wants to, not do his homework. He wants to not clean his room. But he also recognizes he's given up something. His parents are frustrated with him. His sister would like to play a game with him, that he's giving up something. And when we lean on all the reasons why not, he argues the other reason too. And so there's a
Mhm.
story in What Do You Say? We have a chapter in there, The Hard Ones, talking with kids about sleep and technology, because these are so often
Mm.
intertwined. And there's a story in there, my son, who's kicking around here somewhere, he's now 23, and he is the
Mm.
loveliest. I mean, he is just a great human. And he's ADHD. And so, I mean, when he was a toddler, we could have left him at the local convenience store and he's watching Kino, right? And if we could have walked out the door and if the clerk had fed him something, we could have come back in 10 days and just still would have been like, oh, number 7. He's
Aw.
transfixed by all things on screens. And so Fortnite came through our house like a biblical plague. And this is all of his attention was drawn to this. He was 10th grade in high school. So he has a day off from school. And he's a musician. He's a composer now. And I asked him, so what are you going to do with your day off from school? I hope he was going to be like, Bill, I'm going to play music all day long. He's like, I think I'll play Fortnite. I'm like, anything else? He says, I'll think about it. I'm like, so I come home the next day and there's the kid, still playing,
Mm.
at 6 o'clock on a Friday night, still playing video games in his pajamas. In his pajamas. I'm like, and I admit to being a little hot, a little hot. I'm like, dude, Matthew, can you please, can you finish this game? Win, die? I really don't care. Because remember, we were going to go out for pizza. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. My son, unfortunately, is much more easygoing than it is dad. And so he wins. I don't even remember. He finishes the game. He gets dressed. We go out to dinner. I simmer down. We have a perfectly lovely evening. I say nothing more about it. Saturday, I say nothing more. Sunday, I say nothing until like 5 o'clock on Sunday, which if you have a son, particularly an ADHD son, or if you've ever been an ADHD son, 5 o'clock is when you realize, oh no, tomorrow's tomorrow, shoot, and all the things he didn't do. And he is at this point really upset with himself. Oh, I can't believe I wasted my
Oh.
whole day playing Fortnite Friday. Why didn't I? If ever there were served on
Mhm.
a silver platter an opportunity for parental, I told you so, this was it. But Bill and I are writing this book, so I was told this isn't what I'm supposed to do. So I lean in with empathy, right? Right. And I'm like, oh, dude, I've been there, done it. I know how frustrating it is feel like, to have all this pile of work and you wish you'd done it earlier. Can I ask you a question though? Sure. How many hours do you think you actually spend playing Fortnite on Friday? I don't know, 8, 9, 10 maybe? Awesome. Was it fun? Oh, it was great. The day goes on, whatever. I said, another question. In hindsight, how many hours do you think would have been enough to kind of get your Fortnite fix? 5, maybe 6? That makes sense to me. Last question. In the future, would it be helpful for mom or for me to help you kind of manage your use of technologies? You can play it and hang out with your friends and enjoy it because it's your day off, doggone it, but not feel like you've wasted your whole day. Yeah, I think that'd be really good. And now we had buy-in to be kind of his technology consultants. And I know the kid that I got. We know the kid that we got. He's wonderful. But video games, they're like crack for all of us teenagers, right? As well, especially.
Yeah.
But I also knew that he was 2 years before he would head off to college with hopes and dreams and a suitcase full of our money. And we'd have no control over his use of technology. So to add to what Bill had said before, one of them, we encourage people to shift their thinking from how do I control my kid's use of technology? How do I get him to how do I help him or her learn to control for him or herself the use of the use of technology? Because these things are insanely powerful. And it's not like a kid can go off and, they're not going to join an Amish community and live in a tech-free world. That's not really an option for most of us. So we have to be supportive of kids as they learn to navigate these incredibly powerful technologies, which, if we're honest, none of us grew up with. So it's not like we can say, well, when I was your age, because these things didn't exist when we were their age.
Yeah. I'll just add that we talk about in all our books this idea of, as kids get older, we want to think about ourselves more as they're consultants to them to figure out who they want to be, how to create the life they want, than as their boss or their manager or somebody who always knows best. Because by the time they leave home, we want them to trust their judgment, not ours. And so we want them to practice making decisions, to solving their own problems. We want to offer help, offer advice, not try to force it. And there are some situations where if a kid is deeply depressed, kid's suicidal, kids very actively drug involved, we get them treatment whether they want to or not. And also, it's a small percentage, 10, 12% of kids who play video games seem to have a pretty addictive relationship. And they commonly, they and their family need treatment. But many people we find, in our second book, we have a chapter called The Language and Silence of Change. And it's about, we study it, because when people say, how do I get my kid to be more motivated? How do I get my kid to spend less time? We're saying, how do I change my kid? And we studied the science of change. And everywhere we looked, we learned that if you try to make somebody change who's not asking you to help them change, what you get every time is conflict and resistance. And so that's why we emphasize this we talk about in that chapter, motivational interviewing, which is psychology probably know. There's this style of conversation where you simply ask people open-ended questions. So tell me what you love about video games. Tell me what you love about Instagram. What is it so cool? And you express empathy. You kind of use that reflective listening to say, so what I'm hearing is, and commonly what happens is that after they wax rhapsodic about all the things in games, they'll say things like, yeah, but I'm worried that I spend so much time on games, I'm not doing other stuff in my life.
Yeah.
Then they get to that what they call change talk. And that's what we're after. We're after helping people figure out how to make their lives work. Because our premise is that kids have a brain in their head and they want their lives to work.
In the kind of psychotherapy that Emma and I were trained in, acceptance and commitment therapy, we talk a lot about values. And one of the things that we say about values is that they need to be freely chosen. So if you're going around imposing, your values on somebody else, it tends not to work very well. But it is terrifying for parents to think that, their child is going to choose values that are antisocial or self-harming or something like that. But, and there are kids out there that go down that path for at least a little while. But yes,
Well,
we
and the
have
thing
to.
and the thing that is that the closer the connection is that a child has with a parent or another caregiver, the more likely he or she is to adopt the values of mom or dad or a
Right.
caregiver,
Yeah.
you
At
know,
least
and that's the thing.
eventually.
And so, well, yeah, no, yeah. I mean, it doesn't happen overnight, but you know, we see so many parents who try to exert power over their
Yeah.
children. And
Yeah.
okay, accept that. If you have power, you squander influence. I've
Yeah.
always wanted to have influence because, because power only exists so long as they're under my roof or within my reach or, financial. I mean, I had two things. I had a child who he came in, we're doing test prep, and he says, he's like, oh, this is so, he's like, this is so annoying. I said, what's that? I said, doing this work. He said, yeah. I said, I don't want to, why it's just, he said, no offense. I said, no offense taken, and explained to him how he could prepare for the ACT all by himself and he didn't need my help and what I would suggest. But I also talked about what I hope he'd get out of it. And I get this email from his mom the next day. And the first three emails from her had been, thank you for working with my stubborn child. Okay. And this one says, thank you. She said, he's the only, do you know how many tutors we've set him up with? He's the only teacher tutor he speaks about respectfully. And I said, well, respectfully, that's probably because that's how I treat him. And I want to have, I mean, my kids, they are capable, they could, as long as they have a credit card, they can run off and run their own life. They don't need me at all. But I really want them to want my help, right? And to want to circle back. I mean, my son had the second year of college. He was asking me all this advice about this girl that he was dating. He said, I can't believe the things that I tell you. And my hunch is it was because we spent his whole life treating him respectfully, as Bill said, like he's got a brain in his head and he wants his life to work out. And what we want to do is watch him and help him if he wants it, as he makes his way through important decisions, and the thing about most decisions, if most decisions aren't 90-10, they're 49-51. And so there's not, it's rarely is there clear that this is obviously the thing to do. And we want kids to grapple with those, but we want to be part of that. And so anytime parents try to have a power play, I think, well, you're sacrificing the future for the now. You'll win this argument because kids will bend. But long term, they're gonna go their own way, and you're gonna miss out on stuff.
I was just thinking one of the things that I said two things to myself as a child. I was probably 9 or 10. The first was never to be an expat parent, which I then became, which is part of my struggle of moving to Singapore. But the second thing I told myself was never forget what it's like to be a kid. Because I felt the adults forgot what it was like to be a kid, the fact that kids had an opinion, had ideas, were capable, were able to make decisions for themselves, and that adults kind of reigned above them, telling them what to do and not giving them much autonomy. And that stayed with me as an adult, really thinking about how do we support our kids so that they feel that we trust them, that we have confidence in their ability to make decisions and make wise choices as consultants. That's why I love your work. I love this idea that we can help them come up with their own decisions, trust their wisdom with some support, really think about parenting more as sort of the job of a gardener versus a carpenter. There was that book a few years ago, because it just feels so much easier, to be honest, as a parent when I take that lens. And I see it in the couples that I work with. And the couples, you can see the same dynamics. You'll have one partner in the couple that desperately wants the other one to do things their way. And of course, what happens, we see it all the time, is that you become more polarized. You don't come together. As soon as you want just what you said, Ned, as soon as you want control, you lose influence because nobody wants to be told what to do. We want to be more of a team. It's
funny for me.
Yes.
My daughter, who is now 21, was diagnosed at age 19 with autism. We didn't know she was autistic. Nobody knew she was autistic, including the people who did her neuropsychological evaluation at age 8 in 8th grade. But she was always a little rigid. She was always a more sensitive stress response. Literally from the
Mm.
day that she was born, this is who she was. And I figured out pretty
Mm.
darn early that I was not winning an argument with Katie Johnson. One, she's got at least 22 points on me, and two, it was just inflexible enough. It wasn't going to happen. And so
Mm.
probably past the age of 3, I never tried to win that, but would always try to use
Mm.
influence. And you ask questions, and to your point, you played this consultant role.
Mm.
And it takes a lot more work. It takes a
Yeah.
lot more effort. But, I mean, I found for the longest time that I'm really, what's the Julie Lithcott-Hams? We're not raising children, we're raising adults. And along with that, we're trying to
Yeah.
foster really an adult relationship with our kids. I mean, because back to your point, Chris, of, we're trying to values to them. We want them to ideally believe some of the things that we think that are important. And there's a story in the self-driven, in the What Do You Say, where my wife and I were out for a long walk with our son. He was a sophomore in high school, uh, and he was asking us about a party that night and what should he do if people were drinking there and blah, blah, blah. And this was like the first real like
Mm.
high school party. And it would have been easy for drinking. Wait, you're not going. Wait, who are these people? And we could have shut down the
Mhm.
party and his whole social life before it even started. And we said, well, tell me what you're thinking about this. And he danced around and he finally this cautionary tale about some party where a girl got super sick, like life-threateningly sick.
Mm.
And another student called 911, and the police showed up, and all the kids scattered like roaches under the light. And this one good Samaritan stayed with his kid and
Mhm.
ended up getting tagged with $500 fine for being at a party where alcohol was served. And so the
Mm.
way this was told among high school students, it was don't be there when bad things happen because you could get in trouble even if you weren't
Yeah.
doing anything wrong. And so this was his concern, was he could get in trouble, and he was a pretty nerdy kid, much like his dad at that point. So he wasn't going to, so he was worried. And I just said, well, there's another way to think about that.
Mm.
He said, well, what's that? I said, one could credibly make the argument that that good Samaritan who stuck around to make sure that that kid was okay got pasted with $500, and that's a lot of babysitting money, don't get me wrong, but she paid $500 to save the life of another kid.
Yeah. Beautiful.
And in terms of all of us as parents say, we don't care about money, we care about your virtues, your values. Would that conversation have emanated? Would he have had the courage to ask that conversation if my wife and I had been all command and control? I
Yeah.
don't think I don't think it would have. And so all of these things matter, and it starts with things like homework.
Mm.
It really does.
Yeah. And I guess I love that. I remember that story. I remember exactly where I read it too, because it struck me as such a beautiful conversation that you had with your son. And it was symbolic of where we really want to be. We really want to be in a place with our kids where they can bring these things up. That's what we want to be able to do for them, right? We have that wisdom, we have that lived experience, but we don't have their brain and their ideas and their interests, but their culture.
Right?
And yes, I love that story, and I love this idea that we can be alongside them and watch them grow and hear their perspective on the world. Like that's one of my favorite things, is to talk to my sons, especially because they're a bit older, and see how they make sense of the world, because it's so different to the way I do. And I learn so much from them. And I just wanted to ask, it's sort of off the back of that, in one of your principles. So we're sort of working our way through your principles without naming them. But one of them that I think is so helpful to be explicit about is this: be a non-anxious presence, or be a non-anxious parent. Because that's the undercurrent, isn't it, to a lot of this, that when we kick into control, it's often because of anxiety and fear. Like I was saying at the beginning, this fear that my kid will get into trouble, they'll get, intoxicated, end up in prison, they'll fail all their exams and be, especially boys, and we know that boys are struggling academically more than girls. This kind of anxiety drives the desire to control. So how do we support parents to be less of an anxious presence without creating more anxiety? Don't be anxious.
You feel
It's
bad about the
dangerous.
things, but feel bad about being anxious. You should be anxious about not being anyway. Sorry.
Yes,
Go ahead,
exactly.
Bill.
I saw this kid years ago when I used to do psychotherapy. I saw this kid, his family, and he was in 8th grade, and he's going through a hard time. And his dad, I was meeting with the parents, and the dad started crying. And he said, first thing he said was, "This should be the happiest time in his life." I said, "Well, obviously you didn't go to 8th grade. I mean, but then he said, he's crying, and he said, "I just wanted to feel good about himself." And after he stopped crying, I said, respectfully, I think we can more convincingly help him feel good about himself if we aren't worried sick. If we can kind of make peace with, okay, he's having a hard time right now. It's not the end of the world. We're going to support him. We'll get him help if he needs it. But people go through hard things. That happens to a lot of people. And I've been a neuropsychologist for over 40 years now. And I've been saying in my lectures the last couple of years that I wish I could implant in other parents' brains the memory circuits in my brain to probably know 1,000 kids who are a disaster at some time in their life who turned out great. And I think that part of it is just remembering that we don't have to solve our kids' problems. It's okay for them to go through hard times with support, and that most people their climb to successful life and a happy life isn't completely just a smooth ride uphill. It comes with something. So I think part of that is keeping this. We say take a long view, and our experience is that if we don't get stuck in some kind of anxious, fearful kind of reaction to where kids are, they don't get stuck. They grow out of stuff. And also, there's just so many influences on kids who aren't us. We oftentimes think that we're thinking for them. If this doesn't get solved immediately, it'll just get worse. Well, it usually doesn't.
Because kids want their lives to work out. Yeah. It's when kids are having a hard time, or even when they're not having a time, I think it's a default setting for parents to want to protect their kids from having hard feelings. And I get it. But our job is really not to protect our kids from experiencing the whole range of human emotions, but to support them when they're experiencing them. And that's hard because, I think a lot of times parents try to head off problems because not just their kids' distress, but it's stressful to them when their kids are having distress. And so we talk about this idea of being a non-anxious presence where you're simply not overly emotional. You're not overreactive. When the kid, crashes the car, you can say, look, let's talk. Are you okay? And anything that could have led to that. And can we think about what we might do differently next time? And, as Bill would say, has said, when kids are struggling, if you simply knew that this was part of their path, but you knew they were going to come out on the other side, then you wouldn't worry about it. You just say, this is what it is. In this book, in the 7 principles, we talk about things that parents can do move in the direction of being a non-anxious presence. We talk about this both from things we can do physiologically and what we can also do cognitively, right? So sleep and meditation and exercise and all these kind of things that literally rewire the brain in ways to be more tolerant, emotionally resilient to stuff that is hard. My son, who's running around downstairs somewhere, the summer after his first year of college, he developed a brain tumor. We were literally on the phone with him when this went down. It was quite a to-do. And, he got into Children's National, he got good treatment, blah, blah, blah. But my wife and I were out for dinner probably 6 weeks into this. And she said, I've had 3 people ask me, how are you so calm about this? And part of it is, we have a really good relationship. We had a really good team helping him. We had confidence that this was going to be good enough. But she said, honestly, I think it's the meditation. And Bill's been practicing what's called transcendental meditation for almost 50 years. And I've been at least a decade. I'm not really sure. I don't pay attention to years. My wife for 5, 6, 7 years. And my wife is incredibly human, but she's from a family that are pretty neurotic, if I'm completely honest. And she said, really, for whenever a nervous system or a family system or a school system, a political system has more inflows of stress than healthy outflows of stress, all kinds of bad stuff happens. And so as capable and bright as she is, I think she handled things so much better because she had something that she could turn to that with inflows of stress, outflows of stress.
Yeah.
And we also talk about this, from a cognitive perspective. As Bill said before, almost all of our fears about our kids, things not going well, are about the future, right? We're thinking they'll never have friends again, or they'll never
Yeah.
turn this around. They'll never be successful in college. They'll never have a good life. And my daughter was line going in the middle school for her, ended up a full school refusal for the last 3 months of eighth grade. And it was really hard. It was hard. It was hard for her. It was hard for brothers, hard for me, for my wife. And, but I went out for a walk this one time and said, I said, listen, kiddo, I am confident this is going to work out okay somehow. You're going to contribute in the world in a cool way. You're going to have really good friends. You're going to do stuff that's meaningful. And she said, it sure doesn't feel that way. I said, I know it does. And everything's hard right now. You don't have any good friends. You're out in school. Everything's hard. But I don't play this card very often, but said I've been around the sun a few more times than you have. And from my experience, I think this is going to work out. And look, you're creative as all get out. You're super smart. You're vicious at board games. This is going to work out okay. And part of the reason I can have confidence of this is I had a really challenging childhood. And my dad was an alcoholic. He drank himself to death. My mom was institutionalized. I spent 3 months of 7th grade in a pediatric
Oh, wow.
psychiatric hospital. I'm not without my faults or without my scars, but it's like people want their lives to work out. And Tina Payne Bryson would say, the recipe, adversity plus support becomes resilience. And that's you. And if we can hold to that thought that our job is not to protect kids from hard stuff, but to say we're going to get through this, and our job is to figure this out somehow. So I had the most brilliant conversation with my lovely son about a month ago. So I'm going to tell the story without tearing up. And we were a long ride, and he was talking about metacognition, and he's really into this and follows the right people on TikTok and everything else about how to think about his own thinking. And I jumped in. I said, I have to tell you, when you were going through this brain tumor thing, I had to project myself into the future and imagine what would happen if you didn't have a good outcome. If you ended up impaired or deeply impaired, or you weren't who you were, you end up dead. Because I had to make peace with that so that I wouldn't be undone by utter fear. And so in this moment, I could be the person I was trying to be for Mom, for Katie, for you, because otherwise I would just like melt. And he looks at me and he said, I did the exact same thing.
Oh, wow.
What? Yeah. I had to imagine what would happen if I died. And I'm like, and he said, well, I told myself, if that's what happens, I've had a wonderful life.
Mm.
And you're like,
Mm.
and he spent 3 months getting chemotherapy at Children's National, having made peace with that somehow,
Wow.
learning to become a composer, and wrote all this beautiful music. And you're like, are you kidding me? And so it's not, sorry, I'm really teary at this because it moves me enormously. And it's hard. I mean, I know there are people who listen to you because you give them so much wisdom, where things are so hard for their kids, emotionally, attentionally, physical health. I mean, there's so many. I mean, if we could, the four of us sit here and say to everyone who's listening that nothing truly bad would ever happen to your kid. You'd never get beamed in the head with a fastball. God, that'd be amazing. But there's this thing called life.
Yeah.
And so Bill has it so right. For you all, for us, we've seen so many kids who struggle, and they tend to, not always, but they tend to make things work out because it's their lives and they want them to work out. And so for us, if we can have parents just hold to that thought and really work. There was a client years ago who said, she was a humorist. She said, we really shouldn't call it raising children. We should call it lowering parents. And we can work on ourselves and not be so anxious and say, yeah, this sucks. Everything about 8th grade sucks. And that's okay. That's okay. Oh, it makes it a whole lot easier. Everything else is just footnotes, right?
So some months ago, maybe a year ago, Ned's son said, I've been thinking about what happened with the brain tumor. Maybe it was a good thing because I had all that time when I had to take time off from school to create all this music. And I'm sure it would have been easier for everybody had not had to go through that. but in the scheme of things, who knows?
Yeah.
And so often we think that we know what's best for kids, but we don't really generally, because so often when we go through something hard and it feels like a disaster, 6 months later or a year later, 2 years later, oh my God, thank God for that. I mean, the most painful, one of the most painful experiences in my life, at least most embarrassing, was when I flunked out of graduate school the first time I went. And it took me literally 1 month of being out of this doctoral program in English and realizing, thank God, there's no way I should have stayed in that program. No way I was meant to be an English professor. And it's the best. I actually, 2 years later, I ran into the one professor who flunked me, so I couldn't go back. And I thanked him for flunking me. And, so we just don't know. And we want kids to be able to trust their own judgment, to practice making good decisions, practice solving their problems, so they become capable of running their own lives before they leave home.
I flunked out as a pre-med major, but the very last class I took before they kicked me out of UC Berkeley was a psychology class, and I thought, this is what I want to do.
My gosh!
I was at Berkeley too. I flunked out.
Great.
I mean, every time Bill tells that story, I mean, it's so moving to me, because when I think about the thousands of people whose lives you have changed and put them in a different direction. To your point, your words, thank God you're not an English professor. I mean, I know you write brilliantly, but I mean, oh, come on.
Thanks, buddy.
Well, I mean, this reminds me of, there's a doctor of social work, Froma Walsh. She's in Chicago, and she talks a lot about resilience. And she talks about bouncing forward. Not just bouncing back, but bouncing forward.
That.
That we come through these experiences better off. We've written a bunch of music. We've learned something about ourselves. We've connected with our neighbors because of the power outage that got us all helping each other out. And so that's what we hope for our kids, is that they can bounce forward through these situations.
That's beautifully put.
That's a great line.
In our new book, we talk about the reason that we want kids to have some problems and to solve them is that when something stressful happens to a kid and the kid tries to figure out what to do, the prefrontal cortex of the brain has to activate. And then whenever the prefrontal cortex activates, it dampens down the stress response. So the kid goes into coping mode. And what we want is for kids to have that experience a lot, and not overwhelmingly, not toxically, but to be stressed and to figure out how to deal with it. And then that changes the brain in a way that when something stressful happens, they don't panic. They cope. They go into that coping mode. And that's the way you develop confidence. How do you develop confidence that you can handle hard situations? It's situations.
Yeah,
that's right.
Zone of proximal development.
That is so true. Just very briefly, I was just thinking that so much of this conversation is, for me, the sentiment also is about how we regulate as parents, how we trust that we can cope with whatever comes. I mean, Ned, your story about your son is incredibly moving and beautiful, and I'm so glad everything went well. But it reminds me that, our job as parents is to practice self-regulation and to recognize that is really hard. Being a parent, it really does feel like I'm carrying my heart on my sleeve all the time. Like it's the most anxiety-provoking, beautiful, hard job I've ever done. It's the happiest I've ever been, to be honest. I wasn't very as happy as a non-parent as I am as a parent. I think I feel incredibly privileged to be a parent. And
I love that. There's so many parents, it's so many people right now thinking, well, it's not worth it. I love that you shared that.
Yes, thank
so
you.
wonderful.
It really is. And I do think I'm very lucky in that sense, be it because I have tremendous kids, genetically somehow they've come out quite well, but also because I do love children anyway. Like I loved working with kids. So kids, I find them quite fascinating, and they've just got a way of seeing the world that I don't want to lose. And adults, we don't have as much fun as them. We don't have as much humor as them. We don't have the same curiosity, being mesmerized by a stone. I mean, how cool is that?
Well, what was it? Is it Proust said that the journey of discovery is not traveling to far distant lands as you've gone to Singapore, but in seeing the world through new eyes.
Yeah.
And what does a child do but see the world because literally it has new eyes?
Yeah,
So-
Yeah.
help us
So
do
good.
that too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'll
Love
add
it.
that,
Right.
as Chris knows, having adult children is really great
Mm.
too.
Yeah.
And that's partly why just focusing on putting a connection first. Don't
Yes.
sacrifice your relationship with
true.
your kid
Yeah.
for their something about
Yes.
their achievement, or be glad to see them, enjoy them while you have them at home.
Yeah.
Develop that
Yes.
relationship that's going to sustain. My kids are 42 and 40. And it's just
Oh.
and my daughter and her family have been living with me the last 3 months. And
Oh.
they just moved back into their house, but had some work time. But it's been so incredibly cool to have them here and have a relationship with my daughter at age 42.
Mhm.
Ah,
Nice.
Nice.
Magical.
This has been wonderful, and thank you so
Yes.
much for sharing your time with us today. I know this is going to be a
Yes.
very inspiring podcast for our listeners. We'll have
Yes.
links to your books and your websites on our show notes, and it's been a real privilege. Thank you.
It really has been.
Our
Likewise.
pleasure.
Yes.
Likewise.
Thank you. Thank you for all that you do. This has been really transformative to my journey, and I know it has been for many others too.